November for me is Film Noir-vember, where application code looks as stylish as it does deadly and doomed. Which means, this week, we speak with Rickard Carlsson from Detectify about creating a combination of human ingenuity and scalable scanning that protects your web apps. In the news segment, Platypus turns average power into deadly differentiator. Protocol problems poison DNS, making it very sad. Two more bugs cut into Chrome, and IDOR makes passwords DOA for DoD, and more. Step into the shadows and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Application security is hard when security is separated from your DevOps workflow. Security has traditionally been the final hurdle in the development lifecycle. Iterative development workflows can make security a release bottleneck. With GitLab, security is built into the CI/CD process. Every code commit is automatically scanned for security vulnerabilities in your code and its dependencies. Results are delivered to the developer in their native workflow for rapid remediation. Learn how GitLab enables DevSecOps. Visit securityweekly.com/GitLab for a 30-day free trial. With 84% of cyber attacks targeting the application layer, securing your software is more challenging than ever. Synopsys enables DevSecOps with a portfolio of industry-leading tools including Coverity, Black Duck, and Seeker to help you build secure, high-quality software faster. Synopsys is the leader in application security testing. Visit securityweekly.com/Synopsys to learn more. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 130, recorded November 16th, 2020. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with Matt Alderman. Hello, Matt.
Happy Monday. This is going to be so much better than my budget meeting this morning.
And the other reason it's going to be so much better is we have John Kinsella with us as well. Hello, John.
Woohoo! Yay! I thought Matt was going to say it was going to be so much better than his weekend. I was going to say, wow, it must have been a sad weekend. But this is still fun.
This is still fun, and as a check for the quiz for the listeners, figure out which one of us has had the most coffee this morning. Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15th anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly live on YouTube. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to view the agenda and register for free. Would you like to have all of your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips? Do you want to hear from Sam and Andrea when we have upcoming webcasts and technical trainings? Have a question for one of our illustrious hosts, someone from the Security Weekly team, or wish you could hang out with the Security Weekly crew and community? Subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher, sign up for our mailing list, and join our Discord server to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Detectify is led by entrepreneurial tech nerd Rickard Carlsson. As one of the co-founders, Rickard has grown Detectify from a group of ethical hackers with an idea on how to make the internet safer to an international industry challenger that's 140 plus people strong. Combining software automation with the knowledge of elite hackers and scaling it to the masses, Detectify makes security a collaborative effort that changes traditional ways of working. Rickard has a background in tech and management consulting and has lived and worked in Sweden, India, and the US. Hello, Rickard. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. And as we've been repeating a couple times so far already in the intro and just now in your bio, that I want to dive in right from the very beginning about this combination of human ingenuity and automation. And we're really talking about web application scanning, or perhaps DAST, to throw around our acronyms. But what you've done, it looks like, it sounds like, and what we'd love to hear more of, is how to take that, call it the bug bounty approach or that manual approach, and figuring out how to take the smartness of a human looking in detail at one web application, and then trying to figure out how to do that with not just 10, but maybe 100 or 1,000 or more applications.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Detectify was started with the background of my, so to say, co-founding team was really strong in some of the responsible disclosure and bug hunting scene, and started to see, the commonality and simplifying their own lives with automation. And then it said, hey, if we can do this with 3-4 people and putting automation and building a tool that can take on really big corporates that have today established tools, what happens if we scale this approach and add a few more hackers to it and build, so to say, like an automation engine powered by the freelance hackers that works on responsible disclosure programs?
So there's got to be, I think there's a nuance here that we'll get into some more detail, I suspect. But one of the ways of scaling, of course, of just talking about bug bounty programs in general, is that a organization, a company might they might not even have an application security team, or their application security team might be 2 or 3 people. So you bring in a bug bounty program, and you perhaps get that 2 or 3 is now augmented by 200 or 300 or 2,000 or 3,000. But why can't we just keep throwing, or, this is a bit of a leading question, but why can't we just keep throwing people at this problem and say we actually have 10,000, hackers looking at this web application, and that's enough?
I think there is a concept of things a machine should do, things that a machine is good at, and a human should do things that a human is good at. And I think machine is good at solving things and doing things in a consistent, repeatable way, whereas human is good at finding new approaches and new angles to things. And the way that we think about it is, if there are things that are repeatable, why should a human do it? And it's better than the machine to do it and allow for the humans to focus on the more ingenuity things instead of focusing on the repeatable things. And so we want to take things that a human has figured out, scale it with automation, and put it in the hands of people that need it, because it can also be hard to interact with a group of freelancers, and they're really. But of course, it comes with benefit. But the idea is, if you can take things from a human, automate it, and then make it available to a much larger group, then I think we can reach a different scale in solving the problem. Because looking at the real world, there are a few hundred or a few thousand people in the world that's really, really strong in application security, but you have 30-40 million developers out there. And in general, how do you scale the knowledge of then a few thousand to the range of 30-40 million?
Yeah, I think what that speaks to too is you look at any of the numbers that the bounty platforms have published, and you tend to find that the smaller group of researchers are the ones finding the majority of the vulnerabilities. And so it's not just that we can scale out with humans, which, if we're going to talk about DevOps, one of the tenets there is also just let's scale as much as we can through automation. So I'm curious then, what does it mean to automate what you're doing? In other words, walk us through a little bit of this process to say you're collaborating with a handful of these researchers. What are you doing to turn their brains into code, so to speak?
So what we do is that we allow for people that find like a new attack vector, a new attack pattern that is repeatable. So it's not a very standard in detail privilege escalation or an IDOR attack, but something that is a bit more generally repeatable and applicable for machines. We allow this freelance to send these codes and snippets and attack vectors to us. We then take and automate them. And every time that their, so to say, module then finds a vulnerability in one of our customers, they get a bounty back. And the benefit with this, if their module finds a hit on 10,000 customers, they get the benefit of saying module value times 10,000. And the whole idea is the more customers we have, the better it is for the hackers, but with not more work. And then the better hackers we can be able to attract, the more modules and tests we were able to build and generate and run on our customers. And in that sense, let's say build a platform that can benefit both sides.
That both sides aspect definitely appeals to me, and is something I want to glom onto a bit there too. Because as you said, you've got two audiences: one, application owners that want to find the vulns, the flaws in their applications, and fix them. But you've also got the people creating, applying their ingenuity, to use our word of the day, creating these tests, but also getting benefit out of them. So I really like that way of embracing that aspect of the community so they can benefit from that work. I'm curious too then, what are there certain types of vulnerabilities that lend themselves more easily to this type of creating these modules to automate this technique, or you still find yourselves saying that we still need humans for this particular category of problem, whereas this other category is actually, we can automate and scale?
I would say things that are that generally maybe not as good for our type of way is things that are vendor patchable, that you can, if there is a issue in AWS and they can just flip it and patch it for everyone. Of course, then it doesn't solve for automation, because it solves for automation, but the lifespan of that vulnerability is very short. What serves very well for automation is, for example, misconfiguration issues, where it doesn't matter if the vendor puts out a new patch or something, if that you click the wrong boxes and then you made yourself vulnerable. And also another topic, of course, is very relevant are things that requires a human to interpret results is of course bad. As I mentioned earlier, like IDOR attacks or privilege escalation. It's fairly hard for a machine in a scalable way to see if this is a basic account or an escalate or a privileged user account. However, so things that are related, of course, to any type of standard OWASP categories, misconfigurations, things that can be tested with a very fairly defined way. Because Detectify is also, we normally say that we are 100% payload based. So if we cannot payloadize it and weaponize it, then we generally would like to accept it and automate it.
Yeah, so it's very much sort of that single request, single response is one of the easiest ways, and honestly, it can be some of the most consequential if you're talking about many RCEs or SQL or other types of SQL injection, other types of injection attacks. Yeah, I wonder too. So I'm going to switch for a second because we're talking about finding vulns, and I think we'll come back to that. But there's also just the fundamental aspect of finding all the apps you need to protect. Because it's not just the case that perhaps your developers are working on one app, they deploy it, but organizations also procure and deploy other apps. They also spin up cloud resources and sometimes leave them there. So what's your approach as well to just finding the applications and doing that application inventory in the first place to then go after the vulns?
Yeah, because what we realized when we started to receive submissions and we started to automate them, there's a lot of things. I mean, you can talk about things that things that your company builds yourself versus things that your company hosts. And things your company can host could be a Grafana or a Confluence server or similar, and they can in many cases be equally vulnerable, but you would never put them through your, for example, static code analyzer, your SaaS tool, because they are there and they are vulnerable. And that's where we started to look at, because that's also what we learned from all the bug hunting that we did, that so to say a lot of my co-founders are doing, is that the digital footprint that you're exposing is much more than the things that you build. It's things that you host, it's things that you configure. And if you don't test all of this with a, so to say, a modern web app application cloud security point of view, then you will miss out on a lot of things. And for this, we do something that we call asset monitoring and asset inventory. It's the modern version of port scanning, but we do it an IP port scanning, but we do it with what we call DNS brute forcing and DNS dictionary attacks to lay out an external footprint. And on this, we run a lot of these automated modules that we receive from the hackers, because not everything is related to everything is also related to the things that you do outside of your developers and build, but it's a lot of things related to what you configure and you host.
So I'm curious too, and one of the things that's also appeals to me just from that description and this type of approach is that with commonly with bounties, you can be honestly subsidizing many researchers to be running subdir or lots of different brute force DNS tools that, in fact, as an organization, you should be running yourself or paying to have run, rather than so you can have the tool run once rather than 10 people running the same tool is basically what I'm going after there. So I'm curious too, but I'm saying that from a security-minded perspective. When you talk to companies, are you talking to a security team or are you talking to developers? What's the experience of organizations that are looking to protect their web applications, and how does that conversation go with them?
On the first topic related to these brute forcing, and of course, to some extent we do brute forcing, but you can only get so far with brute forcing and DNS dictionary attacks, because we also integrate directly into companies' DNS servers and just tell them it says that you're actually hosting these things, but they don't know what they actually are hosting. So with direct integrations, we get a much bigger footprint. So even what any bug hunter can find, we see more because we get the truth directly from for example the Route 53 server. Sorry, you had to repeat the second question. I completely forgot my train of thought.
No, well, I think that was a great answer too, because one of the things you just highlighted there is that if you have the information, why not leverage that information to make the scanning, whatever type of scanning or analysis, just more effective, rather than make people guess. Give them that map of the terrain, so to speak. And not sure where I'm going with that metaphor, but I think switching to the other part of my question, it was more about what is the adoption experience? Do you tend to find that you are engaging with a security team or with actually a DevOps team, and how are they deploying this type of capability?
The way that we work with it, we want to make it accessible for any sizes of companies. So we have companies that are 10, 15 developers. We don't really discriminate on size, up to organizations that have security teams of 100 plus people, or a few hundred people plus even. And generally, the larger and the bigger we get, the entry point for us becomes more and more an application security lead, a security engineering lead. Versus in the smaller organizations, then we typically talk directly to a CTO or one of the chief architect or a lead developer. So it depends. And then if you're talking to big organizations, if they like the tool, then they tend to start to roll in the different development teams one by one, because we generally don't like big bang rollouts, because let us prove our value. And if you like it, then roll it out. Don't overcomplicate things.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to go next, because I'm curious, when you look at the capabilities you have in the portfolio, how do people logically step through them? And I'm going to set this up for a second, right? On the pen testing side, there's this concept of doing a vulnerability scan before you have a full-blown external pen test, maybe before you sign up for a bug bounty program, right? There's a set of steps, there's a maturity you go through. How do you enable that same kind of journey for your customers? I assume size and maturity has something to do with it, but how should they engage with a solution like this? Where should they start, and how do they get to that kind of end state of, hey, I've got this kind of outsourced, almost bug bounty program?
Yeah. The way that one common conversation we often have with companies is say, oh, we want to test our staging and pre-production environments. But then we say, how often do you test your production? And how fast do the engineers and developers get the result from production? Yeah, but we cannot do it on production because that's unstable and we don't dare to do that. Okay, but there is a world out there. So we normally say, if you don't run at least a recurring test on your production environment and be able to feed that information directly to your engineering and developer team, potentially through a quick triaging process, then why do the complexity of testing staging environment? Because that doesn't matter. What matters is what's live. And also talking to companies saying that this old method of saying, if you test something and you find things later in the development stage, there's a 10x extra cost variance if you find it, for every step later. But if you take a fully integrated DevOps team, even if you're a big company, if it's the same team that specifies, tests, builds, codes, ships, and build it, own it, this 10x difference does not really exist, because the difference between staging and production is 10 minutes.
Right. I don't get this, and we've had this that story which you just said. We've had this for at least a decade, if not 2 or 3. Oh my God! Don't test production. Why does this still exist? Do people think that like the hackers are going to, let me go and hack their development site instead? I mean, I'm sort of floored by that one.
Yeah, because apparently the production environment should not be able to handle the testing. But if we have that, when companies like that, we build fairly safe tools that are designed to run on production, and you don't dare to run it. And then I also had comments that, but we don't dare to forward this information directly to the developers because they may take advantage of it. I talked to a big bank saying, we don't dare to give the developers directly the information because maybe they will use it against us. And if you don't have that trust in the process with your engineering team, then I think you have bigger fundamental flaws.
Yeah, I mean, that whole trust discussion just floors me, right? I mean, of course you got to give it to development. I mean, they're the ones who have to fix it. So not giving them the information, how's it ever going to get fixed? So they're just going to throw another tool in front of it?
I don't know. I mean, the idea was that we need to, as a security team, we need to look at it first, and then we need to triage it, and we can give it in small pieces to them. But they should not have direct access. And then I talked to the tech companies where we run a few hundred applications. They put all the information available for all developers. Everyone can look at anyone's scores, and they say, go at it with full transparency. And then the question is, who's going to be the safest?
Exactly right. So when you think about that onboarding, right, for a second, I mean, obviously, first thing is asset discovery, what's in production, and test what's in production. I mean, that's a simple kind of 2-step process just to start, right?
Yeah. And do it on a weekly basis at least, or maybe even as soon as you update production. That could be a good start.
Yeah.
Totally. And, it's already the case that it's not like developers only get to look at the code repo of the code that they're working on. Typically organizations have full access to the entire repo of what everyone else is working on. So why not share this information as well? I'm curious, too, because there's also this idea of building trust and doing between security, between the development teams, establishing, let's call it also credibility in addition to just collaboration. I haven't heard this described as, especially testing in a staging environment, as the old school mindset of you must commit code, build the code, run a DAST scanner against the code, and then when it comes back clean, then you can release to production. Because that, I think we all know, slows things down. DAST is just, it often takes quite a bit longer. So I'm curious too, what are some other ways that you've seen developers get value out of seeing these types of scans, or ways of bridging that gap to make them either get developers more comfortable, or even, heaven forbid, the security team more comfortable with the idea that, let's just scan production?
I think the benefit with developers seeing the results is actually the best thing I think we find is when we get the comment back, I learned something new today. Because I learned about an attack method, an attack pattern, or a way that I have made my application vulnerable that I didn't know about. And when you can get that people and getting more people interested, so to make, we would like to get security, so to say, contagious in a positive way, that people would like to learn and get more value out of it and figure out new things and get interested. I think that's the biggest benefit you can get if you give people information and access to information, because hopefully you've been able to hire curious minds that want to learn more.
Absolutely. And it's very much, go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, we've heard the stories of, the challenges around training developers to be better developers and understand security. What better way than to give that data back to them so that it's like this instant learning loop. It's like, I learned something new today, without all the pains of security training and all the other things. They're getting it right from their own code. They understand context then a lot easier than they would just through some course material.
I mean, quick feedback is quick and fast feedback is so important. I mean, I can take another different example that for the record that we have from that we received a new critical vulnerability submitted to crowdsource until we had it live and running against our customers. I think the record now is 15 minutes. And then it's a fully weaponized version of the test and payload. And this was actually in this case, this is one RCE in one of these big blue chip tech companies' platforms. And just seeing that feedback, that the hacker got feedback that 15 minutes after that person submitted it, that it was live, just made such an impact on that person's engagement. And I think it's a side story, but just the fast feedback loops are so important in this.
Yeah, I think and those feedback loops are one of the things that, those are one of the go-to tenets we when we talk about DevOps and security. Are we talking to each other, and how quickly are we adjusting based on those conversations? I'm curious too. That's really cool to hear that 15 minutes to develop and deploy a module and then start seeing it work in the wild. I'm curious, what else do you have in the future for either the modules themselves or the way that you'd be rolling out this type of capability?
I mean, we do a lot of things it's about speed, optimization, and scale, because we want to get this, so to say, faster, more mean, and a better velocity without giving out direct details. It's about, I think we're starting to get to something, applying a combination of a bug bounty program, a DAST scanner, and like a modern type of vulnerability management asset discovery type, but for like the cloud native type of setup where you don't have an IP range. The only thing you have is your DNS and DNS servers. And I think just getting this to scale is, I think, the main thing that we're working on at the moment.
And then you see, so it sounds like, I'm going to guess that in cloud environments, you perhaps have an easier way of getting a full enumeration of all the assets out there, as long as you can have like a read access into the account. Do you see something different between applications or the way that you are used against legacy apps versus cloud native applications?
Not that, of course, there is a lot of bigger issues in older applications because there's a different type of course, attacks. But I think where many companies are seeing the benefit of also like not using, the modern button dictionary attacks and similar is when they do testing vendors. That we have had one or two that has been very pushy on this, and one of our customers that have been running like all their vendors with our programs. And of course, then they're leveraging these discovery tools, and they have written into their contract that they can leverage and run actually attacks on them. Because since we are payload based, we are not really just passive. We don't just look at headers and things, we actually send payloads. And they've been able to leverage then discovery tools and all the payloads that we have and actually using it against the vendors to beef up their vendor security and just sending over a lot of reports to them based on what we have been able to find. And I think that's really, I guess, a different approach to when you don't have, so to say, the full map of what you're looking at.
I love that approach. And I'm very curious I would love to be parts of those conversations, because it also opens up the idea of, well, we're not going to test our prod, but we're going to test your prod from that vendor security perspective. And so, wow, that's got to be, I think it's a great approach. Say, how do we trust but verify that the code or the SaaS or whatever type of software as a service, B2B and what have you, works and is securely handling our data.
Yep. I mean, and the fun thing with this vendor, because they're a customer of ours, but in their contract with ours, because we become a vendor of them, we have the same clause. So they actually have the right to run us on ourselves or any other tool that they would like. I think that's kind of interesting.
I'm curious too. What have you learned about there on the one we talked with several different vendors about the interactions with dev teams, understanding devs, and Matt was also talking about just building the security awareness, getting devs to understand and appreciate information more quickly. I'm curious too, since you're also talking to this second audience, the bug bounty researchers, if you will, or just the security researchers. What kind of feedback have you gotten from them, or what is the conversation gone with them in terms of building up more appreciation of development challenges for the security researchers?
I don't think if I fully understand your question. So if you could elaborate a bit.
I'm curious. Maybe I'll rephrase it in a different way. Such as, what's been your experience in talking with security researchers? How they've interacted with either legacy apps, cloud native apps. Have you had interesting conversations with them about trends they're seeing in development processes, or a different appreciation that the security researchers have got, or a different understanding that security researchers have gained now with the way web applications are being built? In terms, and what I'm getting, or what I'm curious here is sort of, has that communication also changed, the way that communication between security and development teams have changed? So sort of maybe the other direction is what I'm going after.
I think what we have seen is often, for our case, a lot of the best security researchers are actually the people that are daytime developers and security addicts by night. Because then they know in the daytime, they know how to build things, and they know then in the nighttime how to break things. I think those are often really good in terms of finding things that are similar related to automation, because then they typically would know very well on how to, let's say, exploit the different libraries and find the backdoors into things. Because I see this response from this application this way. In normal ways, I would have built something in this similar, and yesterday I made a small mistake here. Maybe I can use the same approach on this guy, because maybe this developer did the same or didn't know about it.
Yeah, I definitely like that a lot. Meaning, like, as a developer, what mistakes have I made, or what insights do I have, just the way things are put together? And as you said, that helps a lot with then just pulling them apart.
Yeah.
So one other question, anything else we should be really looking forward to over the next couple months for this capability? Are you going to be cloning and putting more brains into code, or is there a different way that something else we can expect from these modules, or the way that you're building out this type of capability?
I mean, we are trying to move in the same way as the technology landscapes moves. I mean, our challenge is, of course, to keep up with the platform and automation in the same way as new type of attack vectors emerge and the new attack patterns. Because what we in practice want to be able to do is we want to build an automation layer and then allow for other people to add the modules on top of it. And the trick is the stuff that comes as modules, those are things that we need then to be able to prepare and build an automation layer for, and preferably in advance, so it's flexible enough. So to say that exactly this will come, we don't know, because it depends on what happens on the security scene on the outside.
That's a great point. Find out, look, rather than create the tests for what you want, basically it sounds like create the tests for what developers are building and in what direction they're going, which I guess actually does make quite a bit of sense. Yeah.
Well, Rickard, authentication, directory traversals, some server-side request forgeries. Oh, sorry.
Misconfigurations,
misconfigurations.
Lots of the familiar, the usual suspects, so to speak. Yeah, absolutely.
Because we don't know. We have built in quite a few hundred modules this year from our community, and I think we have so far this year also received somewhat about 100 different types of 0 days. Of course, then takes a bit of different approach, because the unknown, and we need to figure out, can we automate them, should we automate them, and how do we then also handle them in a responsible way?
That's interesting. So also too, then I assume that a lot of the finding is also the fixing. How much of the fixing the vulnerabilities have you been able to improve on in terms of either the documentation or the insight, or getting that support, if you will, from the researchers who are finding the vulns?
Yeah. I think we have done quite a bit trying to be educational, but of course we can always do more. We always get requests on can you elaborate this more? Can you write a new knowledge base article about this? How do I actually fix this? I don't understand why this is the topic. And I mean, we need to be honest. I mean, we're trying to build a security tool. I mean, of course, we are then security experts. We're trying to be, but we're trying to build a tool for people that aren't. And then we also need to be humble about that. We need to learn and be able to educate people about what we find, the new different types of attacks.
Well, Rickard, you've given us a great education on this combination of human security researcher ingenuity and actually ways that you're turning it in so it is actually a scalable scanner. So I just want to say thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
This was fantastic. I also want to thank Matt and John for joining us as well. If you'd like to learn more about Detectify, visit securityweekly.com/Detectify. And with that, we'll take a quick break and return with news of the week.